We start the second session of the morning. We have as the first speaker the keynote lecture, Professor Charles Burnett. The keynote lecture is allowed 20 minutes, and the other speakers will kindly speak for 15 minutes so that we have a little time for discussion at the end. So please, Professor Charles Burnett for United Kingdom, could you start with your lecture on the role of Qasrati in Africa in transferring medical knowledge to Europe? Please.
I would like to use this.
You need
maybe.
Well, you can sit here.
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased to be born to use this one, but I thought I could. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope I can be brief, because the subject that I have decided to speak on is really a very large subject. The impact of Arabic medicine in Western Europe in the Middle Ages and afterwards was immense. The curricula of the schools of medicine and the higher degrees at the universities in the medicine consisted largely of Latin texts translated from Arabic. Whether these were originally written in Greek or by Arabic doctors, and of course by Arabic, I mean written in Arabic, for the authors were Persian, Andalusi, Ifriqian, Moroccan, and their religions could be Zoroastrian, Christian, Hebrew, or Muslim. The pioneer in introducing this Arabic medicine was Qustinstine the African, who flourished in the second half of the 11th century. And there he is, Constantinus Monachus. We know about the life of Constantine only from Western sources. These naturally are much more vague about his life before he left Africa and suddenly appeared at Salerno, the leading medical school in the West. He is said to have been born in Carthage, Carthago, which was probably the Latin word or the Latin name which was closest to Kairouan. He was a Kairouan person. According to one of the biographers, he traveled throughout the known world to Babylonia, India, Ethiopia, and Egypt in pursuit of knowledge. But when he returned to his native land, he was persecuted by the Afri, maybe the Beni Hillel, and secretly fled to Salerno. An 11th century asylum seeker, one might say, where he found the state of medical learning so poor in comparison with what he knew in his native land that he immediately returned home and collected a number of Arabic manuscripts on medicine, intent in bringing them to Salerno to improve the standards there. Unfortunately, he suffered from a shipwreck on Cape Palinurus and staggered into Salerno with only half his Arabic manuscripts. The story from here on is somewhat clearer, since we are now on the same soil as the biographers, and backed up by documentary documents, evidence. He was in Salerno by 1077, but in 1078 he entered the Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino, the original abbey of the Benedictine order, which was the earliest order of Christian monks. And he became a monk. That's why we see him here dressed as a monk and described as monachus, which is the Latin for monk. His entry coincided with the high point of excellence of the abbey under Abbot Desiderius, who was abbot from 1058 to 1087, and later became Pope Victor III. Desiderius' Monte Cassino was a center for Greek learning as well as for Arabic. The abbey had its own infirmary, as all abbeys did, where certain monks performed the role of doctors and nurses. But even more so, it had its own scriptorium. Okay, well, I'll continue then. Yeah. So even more so, this abbey had its own scriptorium where manuscripts were copied and illustrated. One must bear in mind the multicultural atmosphere of this abbey of Monte Cassino, which was the gate by which Arabic medicine entered Europe. And here is the Abbey of Monte Cassino. This is a reconstruction because it was destroyed in the last World War by the Englishmen, the Americans, I'm sorry. But it was rebuilt, and you can see just how grand an abbey it is. There's the abbey. Microphone. There's the abbey church. There's the abbey church, yes. If you give me a microphone here, I can use that. So where did Constantine come from? The hazy biography I've sketched from Latin sources suggests that Constantine, in all likelihood, belonged to a Christian community in Ifriqiya, even a community that still had some knowledge of Latin. It is no coincidence that he came from the vicinity of Kairouan, since medical learning had been part of the flowering culture of the Zirids, ever since Abu Ja'far ibn al-Jazar, who died in 980 AD, had been resident there. Constantine may have spent part of his education in Cairo, where Ibn al-Jazar's teacher, Ishaq al-Israeli, who died in about 955, taught. At any rate, the medical works of both scholars were well known to Constantine. What did Constantine translate? The story goes that, as a kind of letter of introduction and witness to his excellence in medicine, he presented the short introduction to medicine of Hunayn ibn Ishaq to Alfano, Archbishop of Salerno, when he arrived there. The earliest version of the Isagoge is heavily Greekized. It's got lots of Greek words because Greek was the vocabulary of early medieval Latin medicine and doctors. And many works were translated from Greek as well as from Arabic at this stage. But the Isagoge became important because it introduced a collection of medical texts on urines, on diagnosing by urine, on diagnosing by the pulse, on aphorisms, medical aphorisms, on medical prognostication, which was called the Ars Medicinae and later the Articella, and this was the introduction to medicine for most doctors in the West. But parallel to this, this medical corpus, we have the translations by Constantine. He contributed to two major groups of texts. He contributed two major groups of texts and a magnum opus, which summates his life work, and was probably left incomplete at his death. The first of his corpora are the works of the older Arabic doctor, Ishaq al-Israeli. You can tell that he was in fact Jewish, but by writing in Arabic and by profession a doctor. In the beginning of his work on urines, Constantine writes, this is his own statement, among Latin books, I was able to find no author who published reliable and authoritative learning concerning urines. Hence, I turned to the Arabic. We can go back. This, in fact, is the frontispiece to this translation, and I shall read this out in a moment. So he said, hence I turned to the Arabic language, in which I found a wonderful array of books, one with information on this subject. This book, I, Constantine the African, a monk of Monte Cassino, decided to translate into the Latin language so that I might obtain a reward for my soul from doing this work, and I might widen the path for those beginning to learn about urine as a diagnostic. This book has been collected and excerpted from ancient authors. From it one can easily approach the knowledge of this subject and also its divisions and indications. It was composed in Arabic by Ishaq, the adoptive son of King Solomon, and he divided it into 10 parts. Now, as I say, we have actually a depiction of a woman and a man coming with their urines to be analyzed by a doctor, by Constantine himself. There's his book, and it says, this is Constantine the monk from Monte Cassino on the judgment of urines. He was known for this subject and for all illnesses. And in this book and many other books, he showed the true cure, and to him many women came with their urines so that he might tell them what disease they were suffering from. That's what it says in Latin. Yeah. The other texts of Ishaq, translated by Constantine, were his books on fevers and 2 books on healthy lifestyle, called On Diets, Universal Diets, and On Particular Diets. And this tells you what kind of foods and drinks to consume depending on your age, on your region, on the time of the year, and on the state of your bodily complexion. That's the first book. And the second book, On Particular Diets, gives a whole list of foodstuffs and drinkstuffs which were available at that time in that area. Constantine also translated a text by Ishaq's teacher, Ishaq ibn Imran, on melancholy, which was one of the 4 humours and which caused a particularly depressing disease, of course. The list of texts translated by Ishaq's pupil Ibn al-Jazar, the second corpus, includes works on healthy sexual intercourse, vijimar or de coitu in Latin, on the stomach, and on forgetfulness, nisyan or oblivio, the last being written in response to a letter to Ibn al-Jazar from somebody who had been suffering from too much forgetfulness and inability to retain things in his mind as a result of too much reading, so be warned. The most important work of Ibn al-Jazar, however, that he translated is the Zad al-Musafir, or the Guide to the Traveller, in Latin the Viaticum, whose full title, in fact, is The Guide to the Traveller and the Nourishment to the One Who Stays at Home. As the title is meant to imply, this is a self-help manual for the patient who has no access to a doctor, or even to a pharmacist, for it prescribes ingredients for medicines which can easily be found in the locality of the patient. A famous example of its contents appears among the remedies of psychological illnesses, as we may call them, and in this case of excessive love sickness. And this starts in the case of sickness caused by excessive love. To prevent men from being submerged in excessive brooding, tempered and fragrant wine should be offered, and hearing various kinds of music and speaking with dear friends and so on. So all kinds of delightful things that you can do to offset the depression of being too much in love. The major work of Constantine the African, however, was his adaptation of the Kitab or the Kunash al-Maliki or the Kamil al-Sina'a al-Tibbiya of Ali ibn al-Abbas al-Majusi al-Radani. Kunash is originally a Syriac word indicating a collection of treatises or a work of encyclopedic character, while Kamil al-Sina'a also indicates the comprehensiveness of the book. Ali ibn al-Abbas lived during most of the 10th century. His nisbahs indicated that he was a Zoroastrian from a Persian town between Shiraz and Ahwaz. And his work, his only known work, was dedicated to the Buyid Emir Adud al-Dawla, who ruled from Shiraz. So this is very much in the eastern area of the Islamic realm. But the work must have spread eastward soon after its composition. It was certainly known in Al-Andalus in 1068 AD, when Sa'id al-Andalusi mentions the author and his book as the best encyclopedia, again, Kunash, of medicine that he knows. So it's not surprising that Constantine should have found this work in Kairouan and have translated it. He evidently regarded his version of this book as his most important work. He dedicated it to this great Abbot Desiderius. I should just go on very quickly to show. This is the first page of one of the earliest manuscripts, and you can see the dedication to Domino Suo Montes Castinensis, and then you have the Abbati Desiderio, just the D for Desiderio, and then he mentions his own work, his own name in capitals. He was rather egotistic, really, Constantinus Africanus. But what is conspicuous is that he doesn't give the name of the Arabic author. In fact, Constantine is a little bit like recent scholars and the popular idea of Arabic, lack of Arabic scholarship that Salim al-Hassani mentioned this morning. He translates a history of medicine from the ancient times to the modern times, which he finds in Ali ibn al-Abbas's work, but he misses out all the Arabic doctors. Just goes straight from the Greeks and the Romans to the moderns, as he calls them. So nothing changes. Anyway, the book is called in the Latin the Pantechni, which means, which is a calque on the Kamil art Sinaa in Arabic, as you can see, the whole art using the Greek words for whole and art. And it includes 10 books on theory and 10 books on practice of medicine. In fact, most of the books on practice are missing, maybe because they were lost in the shipwreck which occurred on Cape Palinurus when Constantine was coming to Salerno. And what we have, in fact, is the whole of the theory, the first 2 books of the practice, half a book on surgery, also from the practice, and the rest of the books of the practice, whose chapters and contents were known from what is said at the beginning of the Kitab al-Malaki. These have been filled in with other works or passages from other works, either translated by Constantine or by his pupils, or native Latin works. Ali ibn al-Abbas's own name, as I say, does not appear in any of the manuscripts. We have about 200 manuscripts. Sometimes the work is attributed to the better-known Razis, i.e. Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, but usually it is just attributed to Pantechni, to Constantine, the African. But he says that he is not the author or the translator, but rather the co-adunator, multorum librorum. He is the bringer together of many books, so he implies that it is a kind of encyclopedia brought together from many different books. It was very popular. It spread rapidly throughout Europe. I can give you I'm just giving you some indication of the beauty of this book. This is a chapter, a list of chapter headings at the beginning of every book, but here we have the sifak. So Constantine is using an Arabic word, safak, which apparently means a perineum. And then we have another manuscript from Paris, in fact, which has a very nice illustration there of some sort of bird being eaten by some sort of dragon. I don't know what that means, but it indicates what care was lavished on such a book. It was regarded as being a precious possession. And here we have a list of Greek terms that Constantine takes over from the Greek Latin translations used in Salerno. Sorry, I'm not quite, yes. And here we have a sign that the book actually spread to Northern Europe, or at least gives evidence of the knowledge of northern Viking runes. Now, this was so popular probably because it was the first fully comprehensive medical textbook covering anatomy, surgery, regimen, diseases from head to toe, and fevers which afflicted the whole body. And finally giving a comprehensive list of materia medica, all the ingredients of making medicines. So this is the pharmacy, as it were. Avicenna ibn Sina's Qanun was to fulfill the same role and eventually to displace the Pantechni in the education of the doctor, but it wasn't translated until a century later by Gerard of Cremona. Secondly, it was popular because it was written in an accessible language, a language which was easy to understand. The Arabic was abbreviated, it was made more Latinate. It used Arabic words, as we see sometimes when there was no equivalent Latin term. It also used variations of Greek words which were already known. Thirdly, it was popular because it had a good diffusion from, at first through the Benedictine monasteries, which were spread throughout Europe, and secondly through the medical schools and the universities. So it was publicized. I could quote some passages from this, but I just want to say that at the beginning of the work, Constantine translates, he introduces the work with some words from Ali ibn al-Abbas, which one could say is an abbreviation of the Hippocratic Oath, which doctors even nowadays have to swear when they enter the profession. And this includes the injunctions that doctors, students of medicine should honor their parents and their teachers. They shouldn't practice medicine for the sake of money, and they shouldn't make poisons. They shouldn't learn how to abort unborn children. They shouldn't make amorous advances to the patient's wife, maidservant or daughter. They should be ready to hear confessions from the patient where the patient wants to tell them things which he wouldn't dare tell anybody else. And finally, they should read assiduously, even if that might cause them forgetfulness. And if they don't read assiduously, at least they should memorize what they've read, so they don't need to have a book with them all the time. Constantine develops on this idea that one should have a morally good, one should be morally good to be a doctor. And in fact, in a passage which he adds to Ali ibn al-Abbas, he locates medicine within the three divisions of science, that is theology, physics, and ethics. And he says that these three are all important, but ethics above all. Knowing how to live a good life is necessary for being a good doctor. Just to end, I shall show that that even if Ibn Sina's canon took over as being the core text of the medical curriculum in the West, manuscripts of the Pantechni were still being copied, and in the Renaissance, when books started to be printed, there were two printings of the whole of the Pantechni, all 20 books with the additional chapters of the Practica. One in 1515 in Lyon and one in 1532 in Constance. And this is the Lyon printing, and we can see here how in the frontispiece the three main protagonists in this transmission of Arabic medicine are depicted. Here we have Ishaq al-Israeli, the Jewish doctor who was the teacher of Ali ibn al-Jazar. He was the teacher of Ahmad ibn al-Jazar. But here we have, who isn't here, but here we have Ali ibn al-Abbas al-Majusi, the author of the original work on which the Pantechnic was based. And here we have Constantinus Monachus again. He's the monk dressed as a monk. And they are, as it were, teaching each other, benefiting from each other, their parents. There are people helping them. And this is the frontispiece to the 1550 edition, in which most of the works are attributed to Isaac, because the editor thought that Constantine had abrogated them, had arrogated them to himself, whereas it should be by Isaac, but that's another story. And then this is another book by someone called Symphorion Champier, who was a doctor in Lyon in the 16th century, and he compiled this new practica, this new practical medicine, based on very many sources, which he calls a truly golden book. And you can see that amongst the sources are the Greeks, the Latins, the Arabs, and more recent authors, and the the Arabs and the Piney. Now these are the Phoenicians, and it's curious that we should see the Piney here, because he's referring to Constantine the African, because he came from Carthago. Carthage was the capital city of the Phoenicians, so Carthage is associated with Kairouan. Kairouan becomes the place of the Phoenicians. And if we just go to the next one of the pages of the book, we see here at the top, Extraditione Pinorum et Arabum. So this is the account of I'm not quite sure what the subject is, but as taught by the Phoenicians, which we can read, the doctors of Kairouan and the Arabs. And here we have Constantine or Isaac, so there is the hesitation as to whether to attribute certain works to the original author, Ishaq Israeli in this case, or to the translator Constantine. And I just end with where I began, with Carthage, which is where Constantine is said to have come from. We start with Carthage, Kairouan, and we end with Kairouan. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Burnett, for this very, perfect, the time was perfect, for this very detailed and very well documented lecture indeed. At the end we will have, I hope, a little time for a discussion. It will be some time to answer questions. Thank you very much. Now we ask the Professor.